Annie ran away again last night. It took me a few hours to find her at the park, swinging back and forth like she didn't have a care in the world, as if she had every right to be there. And she had dyed her hair again, this time blonde. I didn't want to cause a scene with all those people watching, so I pulled her off the swing and dragged her home, kicking and screaming like a lunatic. It was humiliating. I had to smile and shrug it off as if it didn't bother me while everyone stared. Once we got home, I put her in her room. She just sat there on the bed, crying and crying. In that state, I couldn't bring myself to yell at her for running off. I think that's the real issue, my lack of discipline. I've never been good at being strict or rational. I either go too far in one direction or the other. Like a few months ago when she came at me with a kitchen knife. For a moment, I genuinely thought she might hurt me, my own little angel. But then she just collapsed into my arms, so quiet, letting me stroke her hair and sing her a lullaby as if nothing had happened. But there was that other time when she tried to destroy my doll collection. My dolls are delicate, and Annie was playing with them so violently, as if she wanted to break them. I love those dolls. They remind me of when everything was simpler, before I was trapped in this house every day with Annie's tantrums and Bill's depression. I got so angry, I hit her. I was so ashamed that when she ran away, I didn't chase after her right away. I just sat there crying, feeling like the worst mother in the world. After that, I tried to be gentler, more understanding. So instead of getting mad at Annie, I left her in her room and went to make her dinner. I turned the TV up loud so I wouldn't hear the racket she was making. Sometimes she makes so much noise, and it fills me with so much anger. The way she breaks things like she doesn't care about anything. I once gave her a puppy, but she never touched it, as if she were scared of it. The day I decided to take it back to the pet shop, it disappeared. I found Annie in the yard holding a trowel next to a pile of dirt. I helped her clean up and never mentioned it again. I made her favorite food, mac and cheese, hoping it would calm her down. But as soon as I opened the door, she barreled past me, nearly making me spill the food everywhere as we struggled. She had that wild look in her eyes, like an animal. It scared me to be alone with her when she was like that. I placed the food on the table and gently guided her to the chair. "I made it just the way you like it," I said, smiling and trying not to show my fear. She looked at me as if she didn't understand a single word. "Will you have some?" "I don't want it," she said. Her voice sounded strange, unlike anything I'd heard from her before. I tried not to flinch. I didn't want to upset her. "Please, Annie, I'm so worried about you." "That's not my name." She likes to change her name sometimes. It worries me. One day she's Beth. The next, she's Irene. Just like her hair, she changes every time she runs away. I get so scared when I can't find her, and the police can't help because I never know what she'll look like or what she'll call herself. "Sweetheart, I'd love it if you ate just a little, please, for Mommy." And then she said with the cruelest look in her eyes, "You're not my mom." That hurt so much. It's like a knife to the heart. Tears welled up in my eyes before I could stop them, so I left the room. I heard her throw herself on the bed, her nails scratching the walls like claws. When I looked back, she was crouched in the corner, rocking back and forth, staring at me with those wild animal eyes. "I love you, Annie," I said as earnestly as I could, "but sometimes I don't know how to handle your behavior." She screamed, a long, high-pitched scream, echoing like a siren. Her mouth was wide open, but her face was pale. I covered my ears, left the room, and closed the door. I needed to pull myself together before checking on Bill. He's been so distant lately. I didn't want to worry him anymore. I grabbed a second plate of mac and cheese and brought it to our bedroom. That's where he spends all his time now, lying in bed. "Honey, I made dinner." He didn't respond, didn't even turn to look at me. No. I collected the untouched breakfast plate and placed the dinner plate within his reach. "Annie's back. I found her at the park. She's having a meltdown in her room." He probably didn't hear the screaming. I've always tried to keep her quiet, telling her daddy needs to sleep. But she never listens. Sometimes I wonder if he can even hear her. He's never gotten up to check. I knelt beside the bed and looked into his eyes. He stared back, saying nothing. He's been like this ever since Annie ran away the first time. They were alone together and then she fled. He hasn't spoken since. He just lies in bed and never gets up. He lost his job, lost so much weight. He barely resembles the man I married. I kissed his forehead and left. As I closed the door behind me, I thought I saw him sit up, but it must have been my imagination. Annie kept up that horrible screaming for hours. I sat in the living room, alone on our big 3-seater sofa. I turned the TV up as loud as it would go, turned on the radio, the blender, anything to drown out the sound out. It was like nails being driven into my ears, like spiders crawling up my neck, like freezing water against my legs. Finally, it stopped. I thought she'd passed out, but then the scratching began. That was almost worse. It started fast, rhythmic, and slowed over time. Sometimes Annie would make a noise, like she was crying again. I worried she was hurting herself, but I couldn't stop thinking about the awful things she'd said to me or those wild eyes. I just stayed in the living room, trying to sleep. I don't know how things got this bad. I've thought about taking her to a doctor, but they always give her that strange look. That's why I never go to the same doctor twice. I'm afraid they'll take her away or do something awful to her. I've considered calling a priest. I know it sounds strange, but the way she gets sometimes, like she doesn't recognize me, it terrifies me. She calls out to people who aren't there, screams, names I don't know. And then there was that incident with the knife. It wasn't the first time she's tried to hurt me. Sometimes she sneaks in rocks and tries to hit me from behind. When she gets violent, she bites and scratches me. Sometimes I wonder if she's really my little girl or something else, wearing her face, haunting me. Eventually, the scratching stopped, and the house fell silent. I sighed in relief. The house is so nice when it's quiet. I looked at the clock and couldn't believe how late it had gotten. She must have finally fallen asleep. When I glanced at her door, I saw the light still on through the cracks. As quietly as I could, I tiptoed over. I thought I'd just peek in, turn off the light, maybe give her a goodnight kiss. I opened the door just a sliver, but that was enough for her to shove past me, knocking me down, and run out. "Annie, stop," I shouted. She ran straight for my bedroom, making so much noise I was sure she'd wake Bill. She burst through the door and I followed. But once inside, she just stood there, staring at the bed. "Sweetheart, Daddy's sleeping," I whispered. She started screaming again, louder than ever before. She pointed at Bill and kept screaming and screaming. I tried to shush her, tried to tell her he was asleep, but she wouldn't stop. Her screams grew louder and louder, piercing through me, shredding every nerve in my body. I covered my ears, scratched at my face, and soon I was screaming too, as loud as she was. I grabbed her in my arms, and soon we were both screaming together. I held her as tight as I could, pressing her to me, wishing I could do something, anything, to make it stop. I held her so close I could feel her heartbeat, light and faint, growing softer and softer. She stopped screaming, right there in my arms, and soon I stopped too. I sank to my knees, holding my little girl, stroking her hair. I don't know how long we stayed there. It was so dark in the room. I looked at Annie, but it wasn't Annie. I was holding one of my dolls. I must have fallen asleep holding her. Annie must have escaped and left the doll in her place. It was an odd doll, one I didn't remember having. It had beautiful blonde hair. I felt so foolish, holding that doll for so long. I got up and put it in a closet where I keep the others and laid it down there. There were so many dolls, and they were so large, I was starting to run out of space. But I didn't want to get rid of them. They were so beautiful, such lovely dolls. They all looked different, but each one reminded me of Annie. I searched the house, but she was already gone. She must have been really upset to run away twice in just 2 days. I grabbed my coat and got ready to search for her again. Before leaving, I went back to the bedroom to check on Bill. Somehow, all the noise hadn't woken him. I touched his forehead, but it felt normal. My fingers came away sticky with some kind of greenish substance. I wiped it on the bed and said goodbye. It was a beautiful day outside. I breathed in the fresh air. I love our house, even though sometimes I catch a bad smell lingering there. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the sound of children laughing. was so nice to hear laughter after all that noise last night. Maybe Annie thinks so too. Maybe she went to play with the Driscoll kids. I followed the laughter. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more.